Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I noticed a new article in The Nation magazine, thenation.com, titled Cold War Against Russia Without Debate by Katrina vanden Heuvel and Stephen F. Cohen. And I wanted to get Professor Cohen back on the program, Professor Emeritus at New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor to The Nation, author of the book Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, From Stalinism to the New Cold War. Back on the program to discuss this. Professor Cohen. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for joining us. We talked about this to some extent last week, that we have essentially declared a Cold War. You want to recap that and then get into where we're at now?
Well, relations with Russia now over Ukraine look like, smell like, sound like, act like Cold War. So it is Cold War. But we have additional confirmation. This you and I did talk about. A week ago Sunday, on the front page of the New York Times, was a report by Peter Baker. The source was Obama aides, which said that President Obama had given up on Putin as a negotiating partner, now sought to isolate Russia to make it a pariah state, and was adopting the strategy of containment. Containment was, of course, the 45-year Western policy toward the Soviet Union. So it is Cold War. I have no doubt about that. For 20 years, I've been writing, warning that Cold War was unfolding in Washington, and eventually Moscow would push back. The danger today is, just look at the headlines today, what's coming from Ukraine, is this is a Cold War that could trip into hot war with Russia. I would go so far as to say that the possibility is not quite as grave as it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, but we're getting there because things get worse every day. So I think that's where we are today. And just in a word, the thesis of this editorial that I wrote with my wife, Katrina vanden Heuvel, who's the editor and publisher of The Nation, is that this is astonishing because it's such a turning point, fateful turning point in history. There is, unlike in European countries, no American debate in the mainstream. Now, I would need, if you want to give me a footnote, to say where that debate is taking in America, but it's not where it needs to be in the mainstream media, because not one of the 535 members of Congress has said a word about all this. Do they know? Are they afraid? Do they agree with the White House? There's no precedent. We debated Vietnam. We debated Iraq a couple times. We debated Iran. We debated Libya. We've debated Syria. We debate wars in this country, and foolishly we may go into those wars, but at least the democracy speaks. Democracy is mute in America today, at least in the mainstream. And that's the argument of the editorial. It's a call for these people to speak out.
Yeah. I believe maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, Congressman Alan Grayson said something to the effect of, the EU and the United States have helped botch this too, and we need to consider the Russian point of view on this. And it's not as simple as it's being portrayed in the media. And earlier today, we had Senator Sanders on, and somebody called in and said, what do you think about what's going on in the Ukraine? And he said, we do not need another war. This has the potential to be a war. We need to step back. We need to, I'm paraphrasing from memory, my apologies, but he spoke fairly forcefully about let's not make any stupid mistakes here. But the larger context that you and I have talked about so many times about how this came about, the history of this, I frankly don't think most members of Congress know.
I've been around a long time. I don't know what Congress collectively or individually knows about anything. But what you just reported interests me. That Senator Sanders spoke out is good. I want to add, we have been lobbying him, and he had this editorial in his office before it went up at thenation.com and appears in the magazine before. I don't know who Grayson is. I don't know about him. That's good. When I wrote the sentence, 535 members of Congress have remained silent, I wanted to provoke one or more of them to say, wait a minute, I said something, to which my answer is, well, you need to say it more loudly. Yeah. So that's good news. There was also, to give credit where credit's due, on the right wing, there's a Republican congressman from California, Dana, and I always
Rohrabacher.
Yeah, he said, I think early on, back in November or December, when this crisis was unfolding in Ukraine, that we're pushing Russia too hard. And by the way, Senator Rand Paul from my own home state of Kentucky said the same thing. They fell silent. So, I mean,
Well, and let me just
maybe,
FYI add to this. After Congressman Grayson made his statement, and he's been a regular guest on our program, he's one of the most progressive and outspoken. He's the congressman with guts guy. He's the guy who got up on the floor and said, "Here's the Republicans' plan for health insurance. Don't get sick. If you do get number one, number two, if you do get sick, die quick." He's known for he's an outspoken guy, and he's been on our show many times. After he said that, we invited him on the program, both the TV program on RT and also on Free Speech TV, and on this radio program. And he has not been available yet to us since then. So I think that your analysis that even when these guys speak out, suddenly they back off is probably.
but let's think about this. You and I, more you than really myself, represent, generally speaking, the progressive wing of the American political spectrum.
Sure.
I'm a little more conservative about various things, argue with my wife about them all the time. But here's what's interesting and alarming, that one would expect progressive liberals to speak out on this issue, and they are more silent than the conservative wing. On the conservative wing, you have Pat Buchanan saying things very similar to what I'm saying. You have a bunch of no longer so young devotees of Reagan because they believe Reagan ended the Cold War, furious that Washington's restarting the Cold War and destroying Reagan's legacy. They're speaking out. Now, let's be fair for a minute. Let's look at what does exist in left or progressive media. There's the Thom Hartmann Show in its various forms. There's Democracy Now!
Yeah. Amy Goodman has spoken out on this, and she's had you on her show.
By the way, there's John Batchelor, where I appear almost every Tuesday night on national ABC. But John Batchelor is an old friend and a kind of quirky guy, though he's a conservative Republican. He just thinks about things. And then, of course, I have to say that The Nation, which is probably closer to the mainstream because of its venerable age, nearly 150 years old, has been taking this position. But the reality is we don't impact the policymakers.
Right.
In fact, I think sometimes they have an allergy to us. And so the question is an alternative media, such as you and The Nation and Democracy Now!, enough in matters of war and peace? And if it's not, how do we thrust ourselves into what should be a debate? And the only way I know of doing it is to get those members of Congress who aren't loyal to the point of being zombies or who aren't brain dead to international issues to begin to think and speak. But if you look at MSNBC on this issue, they're every bit as bad as Fox.
Oh, they're largely silent, other than a little bit of jingoism here and there. This is also an election year, and I have to assume that on both sides of the aisle, everybody is scared to death that they're going to be accused of being pro-Putin or pro-Russia or whatever, by their opponents.
I guess that's right. And we went through this during the last Cold War.
Yep.
That if you said, hold on a minute, aren't we building too many nuclear weapons? We're going to blow ourselves up. People said you were a red, or you were a commie, or you were pro-Kremlin. But my view is that when we elect people to represent us, we don't want scaredy cats. And we don't want people who think only about re-election. Moreover, it's not clear this is a losing issue. Somebody once said that heresy always presents as
Professor Stephen, we're hitting a break here. Hold that thought. I want to hear what somebody once said in just a moment. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're talking with Professor Stephen Cohen. He's writing in The Nation, the new piece, Cold War Against Russia Without Debate, thenation.com. Stephen Cohen, welcome back. You were going to say, I'm sorry for we have hard breaks on the show because we are both for profit, not for profit, and it just has to. So the machine determines the time. I don't, unlike some other shows. So
no apology needed.
Anyhow, back to you.
When we think about our elected representatives who either don't think about these things and are silent, or who think about them but are silent anyway, lack the courage of their convictions, I recall some great leader once said that all dissent begins as heresy and as a political minority. But if it's rightful dissent, it becomes the majority and eventually it's accepted. We've seen that in American history repeatedly. I grew up in the South. I saw it about civil rights. I'm old enough to remember how dissent to the Vietnamese War began, a tiny minority. And so it goes, and so it goes. It's just astonishing to me, Tom, that there is less debate about this turn toward we're in a new Cold War, this danger of hot war with Russia. The only explanation that I can come up with, leaving aside the fear factor and re-election and loyalty and wanting to defend Obama and all that, is that the majority of our representatives actually believe that Russia, Putin, are solely responsible for this crisis, that we did nothing to provoke it or abet it. But that's not true. And the reason they think this is that we aren't exploring these issues in the mainstream media. Briefly, I was on mainstream television, and I said to them what I'm saying to you, maybe a little more decorously, because I wanted to be invited back, and there was a torrent from center and left media calling me Putin's apologist in America. Long articles,
sure.
4, 6. Not because they want to silence me, because I'm nobody. They want to make sure that nobody who's somebody might say, hey, Cohen's been studying this for 45 years. Maybe we ought to think about it. And that's where we are.
Yeah.
And we're talking the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, all the cable TV stations, and of course, commercial broadcast TV and radio, except for these exceptions that I mentioned, including your broadcast.
So, and you're paraphrasing in a way Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win. Or what was it, Dante? There's a special place in hell for people who don't speak out during times of crisis.
Yep. Actually, to be fair, I was quoting Mikhail Gorbachev.
Interesting.
Because he came to power as a heretic. He was a heretic in the Kremlin. He wanted to dismantle Soviet orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And he was called a heretic by people.
Still is.
But at that time, it wasn't clear how that was going to turn out.
Yeah.
This was 85, 86. And we were living in Russia, and we heard this. And he was a minority in his own communist party. And then he wasn't, and now he is again. Of course, he's long since left the party. But the point is that this is really a lesson of history. Great virtuous change, the idea of it, is always denounced in the beginning as heresy. And they try to silence the heretics. Or heretics silence themselves. And then a minority. But then it gains force, and it grows. And circumstances unfold that make it seem right.
Yep, we'll be right back. Here's that break again. Professor Stephen Cohen with us. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Professor Stephen Cohen with us, from New York, Professor Emeritus at NYU and Princeton, and the author of co-author with Katrina vanden Heuvel of a new piece, Cold War Against Russia, Without Debate, in thenation.com. Professor Cohen, it's something I'm curious about. I believe it was the president who said this a couple days ago, or maybe it was Kerry, or maybe it was attributed just to the White House. But there was a charge made that the U.S. had evidence, solid evidence, that a number of the people who were helping to occupy these Russian, Ukrainian cities on the east part of Ukraine, the people who are being described as pro-Russians were actually definitely Not just Russians, but Russian officers, Russian intelligence agents. Here's their face, here's their name, that kind of thing. And this actually is being orchestrated by the Russian government. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are this, and this links directly to my argument we're not having a debate. There are two fundamental axioms of the American media narrative. Russia began all this. It's just not true. We discussed this last time I was on.
Sure.
We've been over it. The other is that Russia is now violating the agreement that was made in Geneva to de-escalate the crisis. And the evidence is the spreading unrest in eastern Ukraine, which borders Russia and which is populated mostly by either people who are ethnically Russian, this is not always the same thing, or are native Russian speakers, and therefore they have an affinity for Russia. And the argument is that Putin is inspiring, agitating, instigating this unrest, which is taking the form of the seizures of buildings, the blockading of streets, and that he's also unwilling to tamp it down or call it off. Now, if we were having a debate, it would go something like this. People such as myself would say, yes, there are undoubtedly Russian agents operating in these East European towns. I actually personally don't know what they're doing or how many they are, but I know that the evidence that's been produced by the Obama administration and was printed in the New York Times was false, and the Times has apologized. I refer to those photographs they published.
Oh, really?
They now have alleged, recognizable, identifiable Russian agents there. In other words, you're getting tremendous amount of misinformation generated out of Kiev and out of Washington. So we would have a debate about this, and we would sort this out. But here's the real point. Anyone, including President Obama and Kerry, who believe that the conflicts in Ukraine are not indigenous and they are not the product of 300 years of history and are the basic problem, and who believe if Putin would go on Kremlin TV tomorrow and say to the Eastern Ukrainians, stop, that they would stop. Obama and Kerry should resign tomorrow because they are ignorant of the reality of the situation. Whether they really believe that, I don't know. This whole crisis, what underpins it are the profound divisions in Ukraine, geographic, religious, ideological, ethnic, political, economic. That's what created a kind of looming civil war. Putin could make it better or make it worse. But I ask you a question. If you wanted to de-escalate, why would you tell our regime in Kiev to send troops to the east? 15 armored divisions, helicopters, aircrafts. Okay, they haven't fired, but they're a couple kilometers from these towns. That's a provocation. That's an escalation. So if anybody is escalating manifestly, where we can look at our televisions and see the footage and see the evidence, it's the American-backed government in Kiev. So when Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, comes here Friday, I believe, to the United States and has a secret talk with Obama, I will bet you anything she raises this question. How can you ask the Russians to try to tamp down the unrest of eastern Ukraine if our government in Kiev is sending tanks there?
Well, isn't NATO also amping up their forces in Poland and Lithuania and Latvia?
NATO is mobilizing troops toward, let's be clear about this, the countries in Eastern Europe, virtually all of them, including the Baltic countries on Russia's borders, that NATO took in during this kind of Pac-Man-like NATO expansion during the last 20 years, did not, by agreement with the Russians, NATO did not station there permanent advanced military forces. Now they are doing that. They built an infrastructure, airstrips, barracks, and the rest. But what NATO is now doing, and why say NATO? It's Washington. Washington controls NATO because it pays NATO's bills. Washington has decided to move NATO troops, including 150 American paratroopers, to, I think, 5 or 6 countries, which is idiocy. If an American dies at the hands of a sniper or a Russian or a provocateur, or he gets drunk and falls down in front of a car, people are going to be clamoring for war against Russia. You shouldn't put Americans in harm's way in this situation. Put Italians or others who are not such a lightning rod for this confrontation. But you are right. We are moving NATO troops, not we, but Washington, to the perimeters of Russia. And here's the danger. if the Ukrainian situation becomes more unruly, more fractious, it's not too violent at the moment, but more violent, Russian troops would probably cross into Ukraine on the east. Those NATO troops which are being mobilized would cross into western Ukraine, cross the Polish border. And I've said so often, people want me to shut up, but that would be the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Or the Vietnam War.
All to eyeball.
I mean, you know, you got North and South Vietnam. I mean, that's the echo that immediately occurs to me. Maybe
It's a question. I mean, somebody ought to, if we had a debate in America, here's what one thing we would debate. It's not for us to decide, but it's in the air. Would
Right.
two Ukraines be the solution? What would be better? A Ukrainian civil war, which would be horrible and probably would trigger a hot war with Russia, east-west, or the partition of Ukraine, if you could figure out where to draw the lines. Two Ukraines, two Ukrainian states, one affiliated with Europe, one affiliated with Russia.
Right. Professor Cohen, I thank you so much for dropping by. We've got a couple of guests from South Sudan, another conflict zone, who are going to be in our studio right after this break. So I have to wrap it up here. But I am so grateful to you for giving us a half hour and coming on the program today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Stephen Cohen, his new piece, Cold War Against Russia Without Debate, thenation.com.